Thank you so much, Sister Oksana, for this introduction, and thank you, Michael, for the reading the lesson, the memory text. We want to welcome everybody to Wisdom. We hope that you'll be blessed, and thank you for choosing us as your place of worship today. Today we're starting a new quarterly, as been highlighted. The theme, Comfort My People, and is from the book of Isaiah. This is what we will be studying today. So we want to thank God for once again for giving us this opportunity to study his word. Now with me, I've got a panel here, so you can all see them. Fortunately, my device, I can't see everybody, but I can only see, I think it's going to be adjusted so that I can see everybody. But I want to thank my panel for joining me today. And what's also important is that before we go into the lesson, in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy was herding his sheep in a place called Qumran. And then while he was herding his sheep over there, one of the sheep got lost. So it went into one of the caves. And then he threw a stone into one of these caves. And then he heard a crack. Okay, then he decided to go investigate. And when he went there in 1947, he discovered one of the greatest discovery in modern history, which were known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in there were these like pots, like something similar to this one here, but these were big pots. And in there were some parchments, okay, written scrolls, which were over 2,000 years old. And then as they opened the scrolls, they got to discover all the books of the Bible in those scrolls. And one of the books that was found, which was complete, was the book of Isaiah. And when they compared those parchments, those Dead Sea Scrolls, to our current Bible today, it was almost word for word, again, giving credence and validity to the word of God. So it is a pleasure to study the book of Isaiah, a very important book. The book of Isaiah is called one of the first major prophets, together with Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Isaiah has been quoted more than 60 times in the New Testament. Apparently, some people say it is Christ's favorite book. You know, what do we know about Isaiah? Isaiah was a prophet. He was called at a young age. Isaiah was from the royal line as well. We also know that his ministry spanned over 60 years, you know, and the introduction tells us about 4 kings whom Isaiah ministered to. And we also know that he was married. We also know that he had 2 sons. So Isaiah lived at a very difficult time because all around this power was rising called Assyria. And Assyria had taken over many of the nations. Even Babylon at that time was no match to Assyria. You know, so the 10 tribes in the north had been taken already in captive by the Assyrians. And now the Assyrians were coming, and everywhere there was destruction, and Judah was the only one that was left. And this is the time when Isaiah ministered to the nation of Judah. His mission was to hold the kingdom of Judah steady during this time when all the other nations were vanishing from the threat of this terrible Assyrian empire. So our lesson today is entitled Crisis of Identity, or Identity in Crisis. Now to my panel, a crisis in identity, what does that ring for you? What does that mean when somebody says identity crisis or crisis of identity? Anyone? Yes, Sister Marlene.
It could be having a crisis in your own identity, how you see yourself, not being where you might envisage that you would be at this particular time in your life. Or it could be on a wider scale where there was an issue within the community, and the community themselves was a fraction with each other. In fact, even as a church, we could have an identity crisis when our beliefs can start to change and to differ from those people that we were at one worshiping with. So it can be an individual thing, or it could be within a small fraction, or it could be on a larger scale like the community.
community. Yes. Anyone else? Stanley, identity crisis, crisis in identity.
Yeah, I agree with Sister Marlene. It's absolutely that, and you know, time and again, or maybe the majority of time, we as human beings on Earth can't really identify why or what purpose we're on Earth for, and you know that's another aspect of identity crisis. I would think.
Yeah, great. Sister Walisha, anything else to add on identity crisis?
Going back to the background he gave about Assyria, what was really interesting is that how they operated was that when they took over a particular land, they displaced the individuals. So if you find that you are a displaced person, whether you look at it from a spiritual perspective or from our own individual perspective, it does create a crisis within you. How do you identify if someone invades your home and then displaces you and takes you somewhere else and brings someone else to your land? It creates an issue after a couple of generations. Yeah. And when I was doing this study, I thought about when I went to Azerbaijan, they had internally displaced people. They were all what I would think from the same group of peoples, but it creates a lot of mental instability in the IDPs. And I couldn't understand it then, because obviously I was in my early 20s, and I was thinking, well, if they're your cousins, your third cousins, why is this an issue? But you know, looking at this study, I realized that when you remove somebody from what they know, who they are as an individual, as a people, it creates a crisis because they don't know the pegs to hold on to anymore, because you've now removed those.
Yeah, so it's quite important. I think it's something that we as a people need to understand who we are, because the moment you lose your identity, who you are, then it becomes an issue. And you know, wherever we are and as you grow up, depending upon where you come from, people always tell you as you grow up, you must know your identity, you must know who you are. Don't let anybody sway you. You are this kind of person, you are a Christian, you are a Jew, whatever you are, remember your values, because again, once you lose your identity, you lose who you are. Now, in Isaiah chapter 1, God has a serious case, God has a charge, and it's on Sunday, and God has a charge, a complaint against his people. And God is going to require some witnesses to come and listen to his complaint. Now, in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2, God has this complaint. And what he does is that he says here, normally, if we have a complaint, we want to bring it before people. Sometimes if there's an issue, you take it to the court. You start with the lower courts, the magistrates, you go up to the Crown Court, you go to the Appeals Court, and then you go to the Supreme Court, where you present your case so that people can hear what you have to say. So God here has a complaint. And in verse 2, Stanley, what does that say? Where does God take his complaint to, and why?
Yeah, so verse 2 reads, hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. And this is the case that God makes. God is bringing or calling heaven and earth as witnesses to what the children of Israelites have done, or the sin children of Israel have committed against God, the sin of rebellion. And I know the lesson study asks, or clarifies that, it's not to say that earth or heaven have ears that they can hear. However, we do have living beings living in heaven. We do have living beings living on earth, and these generations, whether it be at the time of the prophet Isaiah or even up to the last days today, we still are witnesses of what God proclaimed on that day. And this is an emphasis of how important this thing is that God is proclaiming.
Okay, anyone else wants to add on that one there? Why God is calling upon nature to be involved, the heavens and the earth?
Israel had gone so far away from God. And the complaint here is against them. And there was none of them that was worthy to be called upon to be this witness. And so God calls onto a perfect creation that he had, the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
And he called them because they had rebelled against him. They had forgotten who he was.
Yeah.
And so that's why he's called in the heavens on the earth. He had to declare it. Look, see these people. Can you believe it? He couldn't go to them because they were the ones that the complaint was against.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he called upon what was perfect, the heavens and the
yeah.
earth.
Yeah, that's very true. Because as we know, Walisha, that the Bible tells us many times that the earth is a theater.
Yes.
We have the unfallen worlds who are looking onto it. And we know when the Bible says God who made the worlds and made the heavens and the worlds, and actually when you look at the word worlds that is used in Hebrew, it means places that are inhabited. So we know that the earth is not the only planet that was created. There are other worlds and fallen worlds. We also know that there are angelic hosts as well who are witnessing this great drama, this we call the great controversy. So
Yeah.
God is calling upon witnesses to see how he's going to deal with the case, because God has an issue and he wants everybody to be involved. So again, as Stanley said, and as the lesson said, it's not just about the physical earth or the physical heavens, but again, we're talking about unfallen worlds who are witnessing God's complaint, which is brought, so to speak, in a court. Now, Sister Walisha, God has this complaint. And what is his complaint? What was the main complaint? Still in verse 2.
His people don't know him.
To know him, yeah.
You know, and it's you know, initially when I read it, I was actually quite sad.
Yeah.
Can you imagine your nearest and dearest do not represent, you know, we know we represent families, you know, they don't know you as you know, we mentioned earlier, you know, you when you go out, when I was younger, my mum would always say you represent your home. And I'm sure many of you had that background as well, where you told when you went out, it wasn't just about you. So Israel was there chosen as a conduit. They were supposed to be a conduit for God's message. It was never about them. They were supposed to pass it on to others. But if the person that I have chosen does not know me, how does that bode well for my message?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
they had clearly rebelled against him
Mm-hmm.
and all that he stood for. So yeah, I think it was the rebellion, the lack of obedience.
Yes, and I think this is quite a sad situation, as Walisha is saying. I mean, this is, you know, probably, you know, mothers would know, even fathers. But can you imagine, you as a mother, you bring up a child and you've done everything possible for that child, and that child then rebels against you. You know, there are many reasons why children rebel. Sometimes it's because of the home situation. Sometimes it's because of the, you know, influenced by other people. Sometimes it could be, you know, just being teenagers. Sometimes it could be the conduct of the parents. You know, but who could have a better parent than God?
Mm-hmm.
You know, God has given Israel everything, and all of a sudden, here is the time when, you know, God is expecting that Israel turns to him or continues to walk with him, and they rebel against him. He says, "I have nourished." This word "nourish" has, you know, this, you know, these maternal instincts. You know, I've nourished children, and they've rebelled against me. And now God says something that is quite tremendous. He then, you know, takes these lower creatures, you know, these animals, and compares them with his people. And what does he say, Walisha, with these lower animals in the verse 3?
The ox knoweth its master.
Yeah.
You know, and even those that we look down on, they know that relationship, they have that connection. But my people does not know me. And sorry, can I just say that also when I thought about this, I thought about the contracts that we have as individuals. Like, for example, many of us have insurances. I can't see the insurance company being that interested in me, wanting me, you know, wanting to come to me. The covenant, where you think that one person has the dominant relationship, which should be God, but it's turned upside down. It is God who is constantly seeking. He's making this comparisons that, you know, the ox knows its master, such and such know its crib, but you do not know me. You don't know me. And, you know, I can talk about Israel, but then I also have to personalize this. What do I do? How does my behavior affect my relationship with God? Because at some point I have to move it from Israel to me.
Yep, and that's very true, because I mean, Isaiah, though, you know, Isaiah still has important messages for us as we're going to look into as we go on in the lesson, and that's very true. I mean, Stanley, we've raised animals. I know you've had dogs. We've had, you know, and when it's supper time, whenever, you know, because dogs begin to know when you go into the kitchen at specific times, you're doing something. The dogs already know, even when you're starting to prepare, they already know that dinner or lunch is coming. So it's very, very important that, you know, animals know their master's crib. The horse knows when to feed, because they know that the master is there to give them food. But yet God says, my people do not know, they do not even understand. So it is very sad that, you know, there's a phrase we have that, you know, you do not bite the hand that feeds you. Yet Israel, you know, almost bites the hand that looks up to understand you. So yeah, so it's very interesting, you know. So God is saying, even the lower creatures know exactly, you know exactly who the masters are, but yet my people who are created in my image choose to rebel. Anything to say on that, Stanley?
Yeah, I would like to come back to this point, because later on in the lesson we're going to be looking at, I believe it's the elements, the elements of the covenant.
Yeah.
But I think knowing God is very important, and it's probably the basis for obedience, because how can you obey, you know, someone who you do not know? You can't go out, you know, into this world today. You know, even a child can't go out into this world today and just follow a stranger. You know, a stranger tells them, you know, do this and come home with me. You know, that would be very strange for the child. So I think knowing God, and it's interesting that God has actually said, you know, accused Israel of not knowing him. Knowing God, what he's done for their forefathers, what all the works that he's done, you know, so glorifying God and in our hearts, and bringing ourselves to understanding, you know, how powerful and what God is capable of in our lives is important as a basis for us, for our obedience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. Sister Marlene, I want you to come into this, because God then now gives a litany of charges. God now begins to expound his case that he has towards his people. And it says in verse 4, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have all forsaken the Lord, and they have provoked the Holy One of Israel into anger, and they have gone away backward. Why should you be stricken anymore? Why should you revolt more and more? The whole head is sick, and the heart is faint. From the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises, putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. Your country is desolate and burned with fire. Your land and strangers devour it in your presence, and is desolate and overthrown by strangers. So this is the state of Israel, Sister Marlene. So what do you understand about this litany of charges that God has and describing the state of Israel at this particular time?
I think what's going on here is that Israel is now lacking a true knowledge of God. They lack discernment, and they have forgotten who has brought them to this stage, who created them, who provided for them, who gave everything for them. And I think it just points out the sadness that God is feeling when he looks out and he sees, because you see, God has a standard and he sets that standard. So he knows what he wants from us. But he hasn't just gotten up. You know, there are some parents who, they have a set of rules. And as a child, you don't even know what those rules are and what they may represent, but you're expected to know, but not God. He has given us a clear demonstration of what is expected, and he doesn't expect more from us than he has asked us. So if he says, you know, this is the way we worship, then this is the way he wants us to worship. He doesn't want bells on it. So he's very clear and very specific. But Israel is now doing their own thing. And so he looks at them and he says, alas, sinful nation. I see you as a people laden with iniquity. You're doing your own thing. You're worshiping gods and symbols and all kinds of things that you're fasting and you're praying, but your heart is far from me. I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
And I could imagine him shrouding his face when he looks out and he sees his creation full with iniquity. He says it's gone so far. You've turned backward.
Mm. Yeah.
You're so far away from me.
Yes, thank you. I mean that's very clear. I mean, God is giving almost like a diagnosis here. You know, the nation is in a critical state. The doctor has made a diagnosis, and the doctor has made a prognosis how long the person is going to last, and the report says the patient is about to perish, but Israel does not know its state. Mm-hmm. And this is quite sad, you know. So we're telling you, God is telling you, you're about to perish, you know, and Israel continues to rebel. Mm-hmm. It's almost you got a child, somebody who's unwell and they need medicine, but they continue to refuse to take medicine.
Yes.
And God is saying, this is the state. If you do not take the medicine, this is what's going to happen to you. If you take one more drink, you're going to die. If you smoke one more cigarette, it's going to become worse. If you do this, and God is saying, but yet the patient continues to rebel. So here the Bible says, God is saying, verse 5, why should you be stricken anymore? Why will you revolt more and more? It doesn't make sense at all. And God says, okay, fine. Now I'm going to give you the State of the Nation address. And you know, in many countries, you do have the State of the Nation address, and God gives the State of the Nation address in verse 7. He says here through Isaiah, your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence. It is desolate, overthrown by strangers. And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, a lodge in the garden of cucumbers, besieged as a city. So here, Stanley, here, God is describing now the state of Israel, saying, you know, sometimes when you travel, you see these little wooden shacks that are in the field somewhere. They're almost falling apart, overgrown by weeds. And God is saying, that's the state of Israel. Everywhere nations are falling, you alone are left as a shack, just about to fall. Okay, and God is saying, understand your situation, because if you do not understand your situation, you will be wiped out. These Assyrians aren't playing. These Assyrians are cruel. These Assyrians have taken over every other place, and you are just left as a shack in a cucumber field. Understand your situation. So Stanley, here, God then has to do something in verse 9. What does he have to do? Because God has to intervene. In verse 9, what does God do? What does Isaiah say about what God has to do?
So there's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
There's a remnant which we can associate with. I think it's Exodus 18, is it? Where Abraham tries to convince God that he should save the city of Gomorrah. But okay, so basically verse 9 says, except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant, we should have been as Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah. And we can remember that Sodom and Gomorrah were totally desolated and destroyed by God because of their sins, and God didn't find not one who was worthy to save the city, or maybe God have a reason to save the city because of that one person. And yeah, so there is a glimmer of hope, because there is a remnant that is in the city who are still obedient to God, is what we can derive from this.
Okay, now we're going on to Monday. Thank you, Stanley, for that. We're going on to Monday because again, we're going to continue.
Before you go on, there are two comments on the chat.
Yeah.
One person says that they forgot who they were and forgot who they belonged to, and the second person said, I guess that's gone through the thread of our conversation. And the second person said, the people broke his covenant and rebelled against him, forsaken him, and forgot who their master was. Again, I'm sure that went through the conversations that we've had.
Okay, thank you, Sister Walasia. Thank you so much. And coming to you again, Sister Walasia, we know the state of Sodom and Gomorrah, and God does something here, because I'm calling you Walasia. So if I was speaking to you and I say to Walasia, thank you, Ruth, you're going to say, no, it's Walasia. Okay, and then I'm speaking to you again, and then I say, Ruth, you say, no, George, it is Walasia. Now God does something here through Isaiah. He's speaking to Israel, and he says something in verse on Tuesday here, or Monday. He says here, verse 10. What does that say, verse 10, Walasia? Verse 10.
Sorry, I've got the chat open, so I don't have my Bible opened up.
Okay, fine, yeah. So verse 10, it says here, God says, listen to me, hear the word of the Lord, ye rulers of Sodom, and give ear unto the law of our God, ye people of Gomorrah. Now, you can almost hear a sigh, in the congregation, Isaiah is preaching to. Okay, they say to Isaiah, excuse me, who on earth are you calling Sodom and Gomorrah? What are you talking about, Isaiah? Who are you talking to? We are Zion, we are God's people, we are the holy city. You can even hear children asking the parents, Mom, what is Isaiah talking about? Who is he talking about? And God says, that's exactly what I'm saying. You are Sodom and Gomorrah. This is what I think of you. So it's very, very important that God says at this particular time, his people were like Sodom and Gomorrah. So can you imagine that God now looks at them? So people are surprised, they're shocked, how dare you compare us to Sodom and Gomorrah? And God says, actual fact, you are Sodom and Gomorrah, Sister Walasia.
I know it seemed, quite outrageous that a covenant nation would be compared to Sodom and Gomorrah. But as you mentioned earlier, the very acts that God had given, which were supposed to create an intimate relationship with him, which was supposed to help us to develop and grow and be more like him, were the intentions behind their hearts was very, very different. It wasn't to cultivate a relationship with God. It was to, for something else, either to seem more religious or to have a higher status. So it abused the very acts that God had given. And it's the same with Sodom and Gomorrah. So their behavior may seem to some of us very religious, but they had temple prostitutes, they had these different types of things that they incorporated into the services that were very contrary to who God was. So even though they were covenant nation, in reality, their behavior reflected more Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. Now, Sister Walasia, Sister Marlene, in terms of, I think you mentioned it earlier on, in terms of what was happening when God was describing them as Sodom and Gomorrah, that they still continue to go to church, they still continue to worship, and this is where we talk about rotten ritualism. We talk about their religious services. They continue to worship. And verse 11 to verse 15, this becomes quite sad. It says here, God says, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, says the Lord. I am full of the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of beasts. Okay, I delight not in the blood of bullocks or of lambs or of goats. When you came before me, who has required this at your hand to tread my courts? God is saying, who called you to my courts? Bring no more vain oblations, incense, abomination unto me, the new moons and the Sabbaths, calling of the assemblies. I cannot away with it. It is iniquity, even a solemn meeting. Okay, your new moons, your appointed feasts, my soul hated. They are trouble to me. I am weary of them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. When you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Sister Marlene, tell us about this. How people can continue to worship God and yet still being so vile and evil.
Wow. I suppose this is where we look at our own kind of self-examination. When we look at the things that we do, the way that we behave when we're not with other Christians, the way that we present ourselves, the languages that we may use, and even terminologies like, oh, well, I'm not that kind of Christian. You know, you're behaving in a particular way. And somebody say to you, oh, well, I thought you said you were a Christian. And you might just respond, oh, I'm not that kind of Christian. So you behave one way here and one way over there. So during the week, I dress up, I do my thing, I do whatever I want, I speak how I speak, I watch debased things, I have debased conversations. And then comes Friday, and I start to step into line because I'm going to be with like-minded people on Sabbath. And so I have a Sabbath walk that I walk, but for the rest of the week, I am far away from God and God is far away from me because of the way that I am. And so here, God is saying, you know, to what purpose are you doing this? You're bringing to me, you know, all of your tithes and Sabbath, you're dressing right, you're walking right. You know, you're making all these sacrifices, but not for me because I can see through you. I see what you're doing. You know, you're coming with your rams and your fatted calf, and, you know, you're eating all the vegan and vegetarian stuff and you're looking the part. But I know your heart, Marlene, you're not ready. You're not ready. And you need to address that because you're doing everything that is right, seemingly, to others. But God knows and he sees, he knows the truth. And that was Israel at that time. They were dressing up and walking the walk, but their hands were covered in blood. You know, they're offering sacrifice. God didn't ask you for that. He asked you for a clean and a pure heart. And without that, you can't serve him. And part of our service to God is to serve others, is to show them the God of our salvation. And so I'm bringing them a mixed message. I'm saying, this is the way, walk in it. And I know I'm not doing right. I don't think we can have double apostasy, but that sounds like it. Because I'm expecting other people to come follow me, do the wrong thing in the name of the Lord. Yeah. That can't be. And I think this is what was going on. And God said, I hate it. You're calling all these, you know, these feast days and you're doing all of these things, but your heart is far from me. You're not worthy. And I don't want to see it. I will hide my eyes from you. Don't go lifting up your hands in church on Sabbath. You know how you've been in the week. You're confusing the people. They think you're all that when you're not. And that's a good point, Sister Marlene. And I think that we need more time on this chapter, because Isaiah had just chapter 1 could take hours in discussion, because what you've just said and what God is saying, the true test of worship is not what you do in church. This is a misconception. The true test of worship is not what we do in church. The true test of worship is what we do when we leave the church. This is the issue. And God is saying here to Israel, come to you, Walisha, that, there's this book or something called My Fair Lady, Eliza, some of you know, which I says here. This Eliza is speaking to this gentleman. He says, words, words, words. I'm so sick of words. I get words all day through. Is that all you blighters can do? Don't talk about stars burning above. If you are in love, show me. Tell me no dreams filled with desire. If you're on fire, show me. Show me now. Sing me no song. Read me no rhyme. Don't waste my time. Show me. Never do I ever want to hear another word. There isn't any word that I haven't heard. Don't explain. Show me. This is what God is saying to the people. I am sick of those words. I'm sick of your talk all day. I'm sick of your worship. If you love me, show me. And this is what he's talking about. Walisha, this double, it's almost like a split personality, you're approaching God, but yet your hands are full of blood.
When I read this, what came to mind was Psalms 51. When God did ask them to do these things. These are the acts, the very acts that God asked them to do. But for God, it's more the intention, is the cultivating of relationship that he's more interested in, not necessarily the acts in and of themselves, So for me, God is always wanting that, to develop that relationship. From the Garden of Eden, you saw when he came to Adam and Eve, he said, where are you? He's constantly seeking, where are you? That's what God wants and desires from us. But before I let you go, there's a couple more comments. Should I read them or just summarize them? Okay. Paul Ellis sent a couple and he said, sin is the reason for the identity crisis as it separates us from God. And and he goes on to say that the spotlight was point on Israel for the oracle was given to them. They're basically conduit. They were used. Yeah. They weren't. There wasn't anything special about them. In my opinion, they were merely used to reach other people. And and he goes on to say, "Amen" to Sister Marlene. And a couple of the YouTube comments were, as we study and discuss the lesson, we have to seek how it applies to us today. It should always be personal, in my opinion. It should never be about Israel. It should always be about us. And another person said, to answer George's question, we honor him with our lips, but our hearts are far from him. And that is history always repeats itself. And we know that that is the case. There's nothing is really new under the sun. The Bible itself said so.
And I'll come to you, Stanley. I'm going to just add one more point. So outward Judah was religious. So they were willing to offer sacrifices, but they are not their hearts, as somebody has said. So formalism is a problem. Formalism is when you go through formalities, but sometimes they become rituals, and our hearts can be far from them and from whatever we're doing. And God is saying, I've always required obedience than sacrifice. And it's a theme that runs throughout the Bible, that we think we can buy God's favor. No. We think God can be bribed by offering sacrifices, but God is saying, I see through this, as you said, Walisha. Yes, Stanley.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a very important point, and to our faith. And the point is sincerity. And not just sincerity, it is obedience. And it's reflected also in 1 Samuel. If you look at 1 Samuel chapter 15, and you look at verses 22 to 23, this we will find that God has actually addressed this before. And the children of Israel should know this, but they've gone back to what their first king, King Saul, had done. He decided to carry out his own instructions and brought back some loot, and he decided that he was going to use the reason that he was going to do this. He did this as a service to God, to give God sacrifice. So God says through Samuel, his prophet, he says, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. So then we see that the Lord is alluding to what he's already said to their first king Saul. And it's interesting as well, because this lesson was in the beginning started off as being a lesson that mentioned 4 kings, I believe, and which took us to a certain time in history. Well, look at the comparison of these kings, how they are ruling at this point, to the comparison of King David. If you look at what King David says in Psalm 141, King David, compared to what the current kings are saying, King David kind of, gives them a standard, if you like, of behavior in that day's age when these 4 kings were ruling. So if we look at King David's words in Psalm 141, verse 2 and verses 2 to 4, it says, let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. And we remember that the evening and the morning sacrifice was supposed to be done daily, continually. So their prayers were no longer with heart. They were just praying with their lips, not really, with their heart in it. And verse 3 says, set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth, keep the door of my lips. Incline not my heart to any evil thing, to practice wicked works with men that work iniquity, and let me not eat of their dainties. So the kings at this point were ignoring the righteousness of God, so not judging the widows, the orphans, and so on, which they were required to do. So praying to God and lifting up their hands and giving their evening and morning sacrifices on a daily basis meant nothing to God, because they were sinful. They had these bloody hands. So when God says, like, when you lift up your hands to me, it's an abomination. It is indeed, because, like, as First Peter's chapter 3 verse 12 says, the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ear is opened, to their prayers, but his face is against the workers of iniquity or the unrighteous. So this kind of shows us that it's not just about going to church, doing something in church, and then going out in the week and doing your own thing. It's really about obedience, and obedience doesn't come from a forced kind of obedience. It's obedience because you understand God and you love God, and then you will automatically do the things and will be willing to do the things that God says he requires of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, the church is only as good as how we treat the least of these. And so it's very, very important. Before we move on to Tuesday, just to highlight this point, a mother came knocking onto her son's bedroom and knocked, said, "Son, it's time to go to church." There were grumblings, behind the door, and the mother went to do something else. She came back again later on and knocked on the door and said, "Son, it's time to get up and go to church." Again, there were more grumblings. And then she comes a third time and knocks on the door and says, "Son, you have to get up. We'll be late to church." And the son answered, "I don't want to go to church. I don't like church. I don't like the people at church, and they don't like me." And the son says to the mother, "Give me 2 reasons why I should go to church." And the mother said, "1, son, you're 43 years old. Number 2, you are the pastor of the church. You need to go to church." Here, Isaiah is relating what God is saying. God is saying, "I don't want to come to church. I don't want to come to church. If this is how you worship, then I don't want to be in your church." And God says here, "I look at your service and your service makes me sick. Your hands are full of blood." And this is very the irony, your hands are full of blood, but your mouth is full of prayer. How do you reconcile that? You insult me, God is saying, "I don't want to be in church." Now God is always a God of mercy, and he gives in verse 18, he now puts an argument for forgiveness. And this is the memory text which Michael read so well. He says, "Come, let us reason together." This is an invitation that God is saying. Walisha, what is God saying here in verse 18? He's offering what we call an olive branch. What is he saying?
Sorry, before I say that, there's also a couple of comments as well. Paul again says that the highest form of praise is obedience, which the panelists have highlighted. And a comment on YouTube: Israel compromised their lifestyle with diluted worship. We can certainly parallel this with our own Christian journey today. How much do we compromise? And I think that speaks to what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so go. Can you read verse 18 for me, please?
God says, "Come, let us reason together." That's on the text. "So your sins are red as scarlet, they shall be white as snow." Yeah.
Reasoning for me is a very, it's so important, and I think that's the ability to reason is what makes us human. God wants to talk one-on-one. He says, "Come, let's sit down. Let's go through this." And as a result of our conversation, as a result of this relationship, again, to summarize what Stanley said earlier, it's relational. At the basis of this, it is relational. So God wants that relationship with us. Come, let's do this. And as a result of us reasoning together, this will be the consequences. Your sins will be turned from red to white. Many of us, I don't have experience of raising animals. But many of us do have experiences of maybe our banking accounts being in the red. We know that there are situations. We know that as a result of doing something, being financially astute, that it moves from, from the red to black. So God is saying, as a result of our conversation, there will be conversion. You will be changed. And that's what I love about God. He's constantly seeking us. So it's not about what he did for our forefathers. It's not about what he did for my mum and my dad. It's about what he's done for me that should matter. But our memories are so short. As soon as, such and such has gone past, we go to the next thing that we want. And, and then we realize that that's not what we want from a relationship. God doesn't want that type of relationship. How many of us would want to be in a relationship with the only time the person calls or contacts us is when they want something from us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not a good thing.
Yep. And that's very true, Sister Alicia. Sister Marlene, in verse 19 and verse 20, God then, in terms of this reasoning together, he gave them two options. And what are the options in verse 19 and verse 20? He gives them two options. And what does that say about God?
Okay, before I do that, because I don't want us to just skip over it. Yeah. I just want to go back to saying, God has called us out. He's told us all that we're doing wrong and what he won't accept. He then has a period where he tells us what we need to do. You need to wash yourself, make yourself clean, put away the evil doings, cleanse your eyes, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, and the widow.
That is justice, yes.
He then says, and then come.
Yeah.
Let's reason together. So he's not just giving us the riot act and not saying this is what I'm expecting of you. Let me just remind you, these are all these things that you have to do. And then we can get on with that. He says, if. So you can come and reason with me, but with God, he's not going to drop it on you just like that.
Yeah.
Because he says, if you are willing and obedient. A lot of us hear, but we're not willing. But God says, no, you have to be willing and you have to be obedient. I think it was Paul who said, obedient is the highest form of praise. So he wants us to be obedient and he wants us to come and he says, you shall eat the good of the land. You're not just going to get up and get fat so.
No.
There is something to do here. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword.
Yeah.
Trust me, God doesn't do anything by halves. And he's not just going to let you find your way. He's not that kind of God. When we're talking about a model parent, this is a parent who don't mind saying to you, come on, that's not like the pastor. Son, get up. Son, get up. Son, you are the pastor of the church. You
like that.
You have to be seen. That is God. He's going to say to you, come on, what is it? Come. This chapter of Isaiah always reminds me of my grandfather, right from the beginning right to the end, because there was always that opportunity to come and reason. And as for herding cows and the cows knowing who they belong to, all that experience is here. This is not just any old cow. This is us. We should know which crib in which we belong.
And go on, sir.
Sorry, so we can come to our Father and we can reason, because you know why? He's willing us to come. He's willing us to come. So he can give us the instructions to feed from the fat of the land. But he's also saying, you know what? If you don't do this, Marlene, if you continue to go astray, if you don't listen to me, if you don't apply my words to your life, I will slap it on you.
Consequences.
And you will have to deal with it. Well, Aisha, thank you. There is a consequence when you do your will and not the will of your Father. And so that takes us down to, did you say 20, Elder? That takes us down to 20.
Yeah, the 20,
If you refuse and you rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword. You shall be cast asunder. For the mouth of the Lord has
spoken. You can take it to the bank, because God is saying here, and Sister Marlene, you're quite right. I mean, as I said before, this chapter, we need hours on it, really, because in verse 16 and verse 17, Marlene, Sister Marlene, as you said, God mentions almost 9 verbs. He says, number 1, wash you, make you clean, put away, cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. All verbs, do these things. And it's what Mahatma Gandhi once said that, I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike Christ. And sometimes church people can be very unkind. And the reason why sometimes it's very difficult to witness is because church people haven't been so nice. Church people aren't, and again, it makes it quite difficult when you try to witness. So God says, okay, fine, I know you're guilty. And it's almost like God is saying in verse 18 and verse 19, come into my chambers as a judge and let us reason together. Okay, you are guilty. Okay, and but this is what I propose. Okay, let's leave everybody out. Let's leave the witnesses out. Let's leave the prosecutor. Let's leave the jury. Just you and me. Let us discuss these things. You are guilty, but I can make you white as wool. Now, this is the options we have. Two options, Sister Walisha. He says, number one, you do this, you shall eat the fruit of the land. You disobey, you lose the land. God is saying, I promise you, you disobey, the land is gone. You obey, you shall eat the fruit of the land. Again, if you refuse, you will be devoured by the sword. And God guarantees that you can take this to the bank because the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. Two options, one decision, Sister Walisha.
I see it more as a more of a medical model rather than a legal model, in the sense that you work in that field, so you know that you have your patients that come and you do give them these options. So whatever path or whatever option they choose, there are consequences to those options. It is the one thing I like about God, he seems to take responsibility, like what happened in Genesis. It is the woman that thou gave me. It is the animal that, it always comes back to God. But the thing with choices is that they naturally have consequences. So God is trying to say, don't do this. Come, let's talk about your illness so we can have a plan in place and you can get the treatment that you need. But you have those, for example, like the Jehovah's Witnesses who would say, well, we're not going to take blood. So you've explained the ramifications for not taking blood. But if they don't and they die, there's nothing that you could have done. They've chosen that path, so for me, I think that's what God's ability to tell us, this is not what you were made for. You were made for better and higher. But we do have choices. But before I hand over to you again, there's a couple of other comments. Should I summarize those quickly?
Summarize them, because we should just go, we'll put 5 minutes.
Okay, with a YouTube comment says that blessings don't count when new challenges come our way. And another one is that the memory verse is an appeal to common sense. So this is just a summary. And then Paul says salvation call to. Okay, I'll hand over to you because that will take a lot more processing.
Okay, Stanley. Finally, as we come to an end, Isaiah does something that is remarkable, and we look at the literary, content of Isaiah's, writings. He tells a story, and this story he tells it to the people in Israel, and he puts it in such a way that the people don't understand who he's talking about. So he's just talking about a friend of his. So he says, I've got this friend, and then he tells exactly what happened to this friend. So Stanley, just summarize the story in about a minute or two about this story that Isaiah is telling the people. So the people are very excited. They listen to this story, and then Isaiah then turns the story to apply to them. Yes, go on, Stanley.
A similar thing happened to King David. But we won't go there. So Isaiah basically is speaking. God is speaking through Isaiah, and God is describing Israel and trying to get them to have an open mind and not be biased about what should be done about this vineyard, because as long as they don't know that this vineyard is who, they shall have an honest opinion about what should be done about this vineyard. So God is saying that this vineyard has been cultivated, and everything that could be done for a good vineyard to give good grapes has been done. So judge then between me and my vineyard, what should be done, what more could I have done? And then Isaiah turns around and says, this vineyard is you, children of Israel. And this kind of really summarizes, you know, the city or the daughter of Zion in the middle of a garden of cucumbers, overgrown, and you know, that first scenario that we saw of an abandoned building. So now God is talking about this vineyard does not give any grapes that it should or is expected to, and God is going to remove the hedge thereabout that it can get eaten up and get trodden on, and so on. So this is a summary I understand to be what the judgment of God is going to be. God has given them from the past other lessons. God has given them a choice: choose life, choose death, choose blessings, choose cursing. But the ultimate decision that God has made, he has made, and he has made it known to them that this is what he's going to do. If you look at the previous verses, God says that he is going to clean, or what's the word that he uses? So basically, he's going to separate, in summary, he's going to separate the remnant from the disobedient children of Israel. And by doing so, he gives them warning that you should choose these blessings. You should choose life. And if you don't choose life, I am coming there and I am going to, you know, cleanse my children, and I will reform you, and I'll put back judgment in you, and I'll do this and that. But for those of you who do not choose, you will not be able to stand, you know, because you are the ones who are going to be basically cleansed out. So this is the ultimate, you know, the ultimatum that God gives them. And before he does anything, he explains to them that this is what I have given you, and this is the consequence of obedience. These are the consequences of disobedience, and I will do this because, as he has said in the beginning, he calls upon heaven and earth to be witnesses. And that means that he is going to do it. He is not going to turn from his decision. And there he comes back again, time and time again, and he says that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen in this way. And if you do not go with these blessings and this life, the consequences of your disobedience is going to be so.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, we've come to the end. So this is a very sad state of things, Isaiah chapter 5. And again, we could take a lot of time. We have what we call love's total commitment, from verse 2 to verse 1 and verse 2. Total commitment. Love commits itself. He fenced it. He chose the right location. He removed the stones. He built a wall. He even bought the choicest vine. And then he begins to water it. And for 2 years, he is waiting. And during those 2 years, he's not idle. He's fixing up the fence again. He is digging it around. He is pruning it. And then he says, then it came the time of harvest. And he calls people and says, okay, listen, you judge. And the people are aghast. They are filled with horror. And then he says, what more could I have done?
Nothing.
Love's total commitment now meets love's total disappointment. This is the greatest disappointment. And says, okay, fine, give me some advice. What should I do? And people say, cut off the losses, send it away. Why keep it? You see, and so therefore God says, okay, I'm justified with what I'm going to do now. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to remove my protection. Because I've done everything possible for Judah. Okay, so God has committed a lot to us as a church. I pray that God, when he looks at us, he be not disappointed. Okay.
Sorry, can I just quickly make a last comment to that? For me, the thought is that the cross was the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes.
He could not do any more. And he emptied heaven. So if that does not win you over, I don't know what will win you over.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And actually Paul talks about it, that those people who do these things are treading, he says they're treading the cross of Christ, and they're making the sacrifice of Christ. They are profaning it. And he says, how can somebody be saved? the cross is our only path to salvation. There is no other name. There is no other name given among men that we might be saved. So then if you make the cross unholy, if you defile the cross, how then can you be saved?
What more?
What more can God do? You see, God did not have two sons.
No.
If God had two sons, two sons, at least you could say, well, he gave one son and he was left with another one. But God gave his only begotten son. So he gave all he had. Ellen White says, God emptied heaven of his treasury. That's all he had.
That's all.
So therefore, what else could he have done? So God says, oh heavens, judge between me and the vineyard, judge between me and Wilston, judge between me and George, me and Wallacia, me and Stanley, me and Malin. What else could I have done?
What more?
What more could I have done? So when you read Isaiah chapter 1, chapter 5, instead of feeling sorry for Israel, you feel sorry for God. Wish you had more time. Thank you so much. May God bless you. And as we embark on the book of Isaiah, a powerful book, I pray that we have many lessons to apply to ourselves. Thank you so much, the panel. This has been exciting. And again, I wish we had more time. I hand it over to everybody else. Thank you.